All right, let's talk Tepache. Tepache is a fermented pineapple drink originating from Mexico. This drink is really awesome and unique, and is perfectly suited for those hot days where you really want something to quench your thirst. It's also a great drink to get you started into the world of fermentation. If you want to work yourself up to making beer or mead or cider, this is a really good first step because it's actually relatively easy. This is because all we really need is the pineapple. We don't need to add any extra really crazy ingredients other than what we're going to use to flavor it. And the reason for this is because the drink is fermented from the natural yeast that exists on the skin of the pineapple, along with a little additional sugar that we're going to use to kickstart the process. All right, so let's jump into this delicious recipe. Now, as I mentioned, this is a pineapple drink. So let's start with all the ingredients that aren't the pineapple. So first, let's start with the spicy backbone of this drink, which is the cinnamon. Now I'm going to be using cinnamon sticks, which will allow me to easily pull them out when I want to, but if all you've got is cinnamon powder, apparently that's actually the traditional ingredient. So now outside of the cinnamon, as I mentioned before, we're going to need some sugar. I'm using Panala sugar, which is an unrefined sugar, just giving us a little bit extra flavor. But if you can't find this, you can substitute this with palm sugar or Jaggery or just straight up brown sugar. And if you're kind of curious about the types of sugar and where brown sugar comes from, be sure to check out my video on brown sugar if you haven't already. All right, so I'm going to use 200 grams or about 8 ounces of this Panala sugar. And we want this to easily dissolve in the water. So to do this, I'm going to use a mortar and pestle and break this up into small granules. Now, if you're using brown sugar, you can obviously just skip this step. After it's broken up, we can just go ahead and place the sugar into a container along with the cinnamon. Next, we want to pour in about a cup of near boiling water over the cinnamon and sugar. And then we're just going to begin to stir. What we really want is the sugar to dissolve in the water and the cinnamon to kind of give off some of the oil into the water, giving us a nice cinnamon syrup. However, we do want this to cool before we add it in with our pineapple, otherwise we might kill the yeast that we're trying to use to ferment this. So just go ahead and pop this sugar syrup into the freezer to cool down for a little bit while we prep our pineapple. So speaking of which, let's get choppy. So go ahead and cut off the top of the pineapple, maybe a little bit better than I've done here. And then we're just gonna quarter the pineapple. And then I like to slice out the core like this. And then we're going to just begin cutting these quarter slices about an inch, or maybe anywhere from half an inch to an inch, or about 2 centimeters thick like this. Now for me, I ended up only using half the pineapple because I had kind of a large pineapple. So you might want to just, cut the quarters and then just eat the rest for your own personal enjoyment. Well, okay, so once we have everything cut up, we can go ahead and start placing the pieces into the fermentation vessel. For me, I'm going to be using these fermentation jars that I found online, which I'll link down in the description. However, any old mason jar will work, but just make sure to either loosely cover with the metal lid where there's enough so the gas can escape, or also cover with a cloth. A sealed mason jar, in theory, could explode. All right, so once we've loaded all of our pineapple pieces into the jar, we're gonna wait until our sugar syrup has cooled down to room temperature. Now, once it has, go ahead and pour the syrup into the fermentation vessel. If the sugar syrup doesn't entirely cover the amount of pineapple in there, just add enough water to cover everything to ensure that we bring this syrup above the surface of the pineapples. And then additionally, we wanna ensure that we put the cinnamon sticks along for the ride. Now go ahead and close this up. Again, don't seal it if you're using a mason jar. And we're just gonna close this up and let it chill. Now, depending on how warm it is, after a few days, you should start to see some bubbles on the surface of the Tepache. And it should smell like one of the best things in the universe. Just a beautiful, sugary, cinnamony pineapple drink. Oh, it smells so good. Now, if it does, you're on the right track. So what's going on is that yeast spores float through the air everywhere, and they attach to sources of food, which can be the surface of fruit where there's a lot of sugar. Now, essentially what we've done is we've given a place for these yeast that were existing on the surface of the fruit to thrive and begin to reproduce, fermenting our pineapple and the sugar. And so we're just gonna let this ferment. I let mine ferment for about a week because it's pretty cold where I'm at. But if it's warmer for you, you should notice that it ferments a whole lot faster. Now just feel free to taste it using a clean spoon along the way. And you should notice it should become more tangier and the flavor should become more complicated. You really can't mess this up too much. So once you're satisfied with the taste, it's time to actually drink it. So I strained mine just for ease of filming, and I also wanted to just chill it later in the fridge. But if you want to just pour it directly out of the jar, that'll also work. So to serve this, just serve it over ice. You really want this to be chilled, and enjoy. So I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and if you did, please consider subscribing or sharing my videos. That really helps. And that's it for this week. Thank you guys. Bye.